I think there's one thing that organisations could do to make a big difference, and that's to recognise that there are two discrete professions that we're talking about. When we use the term analysis in the health service loosely, we really are talking about two increasingly distinct, aligned but increasingly distinct professions. And they both require a distinct skill set, and if done well can make a big difference. But they are different and they require different people with different skills. The first is people who specialise in the management of information, and their role is to work out how all these complex data sets that we have in the NHS, what they mean, how they're assembled, how they're linked together, and then to try and find ways of curating that data to make it available to other people to see on a regular basis. Information that might be important for tactical and operational decisions that they're making. And we need to recognise that's an important set of people doing that work, and we need to promote that profession. And then there's a set of people who probably are more along the lines of analysts or data scientists, who will work on more discrete, project-oriented, problem-focused projects, and their job is to try and deploy all that data and information to address a very specific problem, and their piece of work will operate over a much longer time frame. And I think the one thing we've done wrong in the NHS for many, many years is confuse those two different professions, and we expect people to be able to walk across those two professions and deliver products satisfactorily. I think that's very, very difficult.
It's not like being an accountant, for example. I always use finances as the kind of as the touchstone for this. So, you know, if you're an accountant, you need to have, you know, got qualification from whomever, or you have a degree in finance or accountancy or economics or whatever it is your entry point. And it's the same for statistics. It's the same for health economics. It's the same for operational research. It's not the same for an analytical community. A lot of people have fallen into analytics almost because they didn't run screaming from the room when somebody says, "Can you open Excel?" You know, and we get that sort of, they fall into it rather than making an actual choice of saying, this is a career I want to pursue. So again, I always say nobody ever went to their careers advisor when they were leaving school and says, I want to be an NHS information analyst, how do I achieve that? So we don't have that, and we're trying hard to get to that point. I think the other thing is being designated as admin and clerical as a collective is a problem in terms of establishing that credibility with the clinical world. So, you know, I would much rather, and again, we've been lobbying hard to do this, see us redesignated as technical and scientific, which is definitely the space I think we inhabit. That's the role that we do. It much better describes our functions. But actually, to get that change, which would cost £0 to do, actually done, is inordinately difficult. And but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do it. And the other thing is around the whole professionalism agenda. If we want to be treated as professionals and recognised as professionals, then we should step up to the plate and behave like professionals and understand that we need to demonstrate our own capabilities in the same way as we would expect of an accountant or a health economist or a statistician or a nurse or a physio. So I think it's incumbent on us as a collective to actually demand it for ourselves as well.
So when we say analysts, I think if we're not careful, we just think of them as one just sort of generic group. And actually within analysis and sort of people that work with data, there are so many different roles, and I think it's really important, and I think it works well when those different roles and different members of the team are appreciated. And I think that is something that I would like to see going forward, a better appreciation and perhaps even just as simple as definition of the different types of role there are within data and analysis. So like I say, I've seen some really great examples of where people are building some amazing dashboards, some amazing visualizations, but then within that there's a team that's providing forecasts, which is an entirely separate skill, but that they can then be displayed in a very user-friendly way on a dashboard. So to get to that point, we've used the skills of a user researcher. So again, another type of analytical skill where they can perform interviews or put together workshops to really draw out the requirements of key customers. We've seen people who've got amazing skills around planning analytical evaluations, and having them at the start of a project has really proved to have huge value in actually planning out that project and ensuring it is a success. And then of course behind the scenes, don't get me started on the amazing work of data engineers and the data managers. And we would be nothing if we didn't have that data flowing through to us. And the more that we can have that flowing and linked and safe, and the IG side of things, all of these different people are absolutely vital. And if we can recognise them and all their own individual talents, I think that's when analysis works well. And I think that's how we can improve the sort of analysis and use of data to going forward.
Career structures for analysts they don't basically reward sort of technical excellence. They reward kind of being a manager, and that I think is partly I'd have to talk about Engender for Change because my background is the NHS, but I think it's widely regarded as something that's a problem in lots of industries and in lots of, for example, in local authorities. That's kind of how it works, and so there is very little. There's very little incentive for the analyst side to kind of, there's nowhere for them to go really. They get to a certain level of sort of technical competence, and they're told, well, the next thing you need to do is you need to be in charge of 6 people who are all doing the same things that you were doing 2 years ago. And that really doesn't drive good standards. Now, obviously, the analyst being told that is perfectly capable of going away and developing all these extra skills and working in a new way and all that kind of stuff. But unless it's part of their progression, unless it's part of their training, unless it's part of what's identified for them, that's pretty unlikely to actually happen. And it is very rarely. And in fact, all the people that I think it always confirms my biases when I meet people who do things a bit differently and they've struck out and they've done all these technical things. And it's very noticeable that their organization has never asked them to do any of it. I don't think I've ever met anyone doing something really interesting and innovative and brilliant where they've said, oh yeah, well, I was doing the job, and then a manager came along and said, why don't you do this? And I did it, and it was really brilliant. The only stories I've ever heard have been, well, I was doing this thing, I was just churning out loads of Excel spreadsheets, and I got bored, and I made this weird thing, and I went to show people, and they all thought it was amazing. And I've met loads of people like that, and they're such a brilliant resource. And they've often, I have to say, worked, they haven't got time in their day job to do it. They've often worked, weekends and all sorts of things. And it feels like that, the way that analyst careers are structured actually, if anything, sort of prevents that rather than bringing it out.
And I think there's a big sort of issue around the professionalisation of the analytical workforce as well, sort of moving forward. And how do we provide sort of suitable career progression opportunities for analysts as they sort of progress from a more junior level to a more senior level. And I think there's something that local systems can probably do around what we found in the skills mapping work was that every patch had sort of at least some expert capacity on each of the various aspects that we were interested in. There's probably something there about how we better utilise that expert capacity to try and help others and to try and develop local support models that might then in turn help to build a bit of additional system capability and capacity.
If I was being really brutally honest, I think we do a disservice to our analysts. If you look at people coming into the service, very young, bright graduates who starry-eyed and have the world has their oyster, we probably give them really dumb things to do. They're cleansing data, they're doing a lot of the data wrangling because we don't have the tools and techniques, and to be honest, the standards to do a lot of those things so that it's done as a factory rather than has bespoke pieces of work. And therefore we take up all the time doing the wrangling and not enough time thinking about the questions and their analysis. So I think we do a disservice. Having said that, I think the analysts also need better communication skills, better openness to actually understand the business that they're within. So I think some more cross-working being embedded within frontline businesses so that they can actually understand the context in which the analysis is being required is really important too.
Encourage your analysts to be curious. Don't fence them in. I think we're often, again, reflecting in both, actually across all of my career, I've been given parameters. And so, right, that's what we want to know. Here's the parameters. Well, actually, there's something really interesting over here that I've spotted. I want to pursue that, but I don't have the time, or I'm not given the resource to do that. Whereas, again, through my experience, that curiosity can give rise to some really critical findings that perhaps you weren't expecting, weren't part of the original hypothesis. So the system kind of not baking in necessarily, but certainly giving the appropriate kind of structural support, if you like, be that in terms of resources or in terms of time, to enable analytical leaders and team managers to encourage curious behaviours in analysts is a really, really critical part in terms of how we can use analysts better.